The cantina on Nexus Prime was darker than most places in the galaxy. Strange alien music played softly in the background while creatures from dozens of worlds sat at tables, drinking and talking quietly. The air smelled of exotic spices and engine fuel from the nearby docking bays. Commander Zektar sat alone at a corner table, his forearms wrapped around a glass of fermented Zilfin juice. The purple liquid had gone warm long ago, but he did not seem to notice. His dark eyes stared at nothing while his mandibles clicked nervously. The old Vorthak warrior looked tired, much older than his 60 standard years. 3 young Vorthak soldiers walked into the cantina, their bright green uniforms still crisp and new. They looked around the room with wide eyes, clearly not used to being in such a rough place. One of them spotted Zektar and whispered something to his friends. They all turned to stare at the old commander. "Is that really him?" asked the smallest of the 3, a young female named Silka. Her voice was full of wonder. "It has to be," replied Tarmax, the tallest of the group. "Look at those battle scars on his arms. And see that medal on his chest? That's the Star of Valor, only the greatest. Warriors get that." The 3rd soldier, Kivran, nodded slowly. "My father told me about him. Commander Zektar, the terror of the Outer Rim, he fought in the Great Galactic War against the humans." The 3 young soldiers looked at each other, uncertain. Finally, Silka gathered her courage and walked over to Zektar's table. Her friends followed close behind. "Commander Zektar," she said quietly. "Sir, could we sit with you?" Zektar looked up slowly, his dark eyes focusing on the young soldiers. He studied their faces for a long moment, taking in their youth and eagerness. Finally, he gestured to the empty chairs around his table. "Sit," he said simply. His voice was rough like gravel grinding together. The 3 soldiers sat down quickly, trying not to stare at the famous warrior. Termac signaled to the bartender and ordered drinks for all of them. When the drinks arrived, they sat in uncomfortable silence for several minutes. "Sir," Kivran finally said, "we've heard stories about you, about the war, about the battles you fought." Zektar's mandibles clicked again, faster this time. "Stories," he repeated. "Everyone loves stories about war. They make it sound glorious. Wasn't it glorious, sir?" Silka asked. "I mean, you won so many battles. You're a hero to our people." Zektar took a long drink from his glass, then set it down hard on the table. "Hero," he said bitterly. "You want to know about heroes? Let me tell you about real heroes." But they weren't Vorthak. The 3 young soldiers leaned forward, confused but interested. Zektar stared at his drink for a long moment, then began to speak. "You want to hear about the war? About what it was really like? Then listen carefully, because I'm only going to tell this once." He paused, gathering his thoughts. When he spoke, again his voice was distant, as if he was seeing things that happened long ago. "It was 15 years ago. I was younger then, full of pride and certainty. The Vorthak Empire was expanding, taking new worlds, and I believed we were bringing order to the galaxy. The humans were just another species in our way. Small, weak, with only a few colonies. Easy prey, we thought." Zektar's eyes grew darker. "We were so wrong. My first real battle against humans was on a planet called Kepler 442b. It was a small world, mostly used for mining rare metals. The humans had a garrison there, maybe 50 soldiers protecting a civilian mining operation. My battalion had over 2,000 warriors. It should have been simple." The old commander picked up his glass again, but didn't drink. "The human commander was a male named Jake Morrison. Captain Morrison, they called him. He was young, maybe 30 human years old. His second in command was a female lieutenant, Amy Rodriguez. When we landed on their world, they could have surrendered. Any reasonable species would have surrendered. But they didn't?" Termax asked. "No," Zektar said quietly. "They didn't. Instead, they sent the civilians to safety and prepared to fight. 50 soldiers against 2,000? The odds were impossible. But they didn't seem to care." Zektar took another drink, then continued. "The battle began at dawn on the 2nd day. We expected to overrun their position in an hour, maybe two. Their base was small, built into a mountain pass. It was well defended, but not against a force our size. What happened? Silka asked, her voice barely above a whisper. They fought. Like nothing I had ever seen before, Zektar said. Every human soldier was worth 10 of ours. They used the terrain perfectly, turning every rock and cave into a weapon. When we destroyed their heavy guns, they used smaller weapons. When those ran out, they used explosives. When the explosives were gone, they used rocks and metal bars. The old commander's voice grew quieter. Captain Morrison seemed to be everywhere at once. He would appear on our left flank, kill a dozen of my soldiers, then vanish. Minutes later, he would attack from the right. Lieutenant Rodriguez was just as deadly. She set traps that killed entire squads of our warriors. But surely your numbers made the difference? Kivran asked. Ze Katar shook his head. Numbers meant nothing. The humans had something we didn't understand. They fought harder as the situation got worse. When we wounded them, they kept fighting. When we surrounded them, they fought with more fury. It made no sense. The battle lasted 3 days, he continued. 3 days of constant fighting. We lost over 800 warriors. The humans lost most of their 50, but they never stopped fighting. On the 3rd day, Captain Morrison was badly wounded. He could barely stand, but he kept giving orders, kept fighting. The 3 young soldiers sat in stunned silence. Finally, Termac spoke. How did it end? Lieutenant Rodriguez made a final charge with the last 12 human soldiers, Zektar said. They broke through our lines and reached our command post. She set off an explosive that destroyed our main communication center. In the confusion, Captain Morrison and the last few humans escaped into the mountains. We held the mining base, but it was a hollow victory. We had lost nearly half our force to defeat 50 humans. And the worst part was I could see it in my soldiers' eyes. They were afraid. For the first time, Vorthok warriors were afraid. Zektar finished his drink and set the glass down. That was my first lesson about humans. They don't fight like other species. They don't calculate odds or worry about casualties. They fight with something we Vorthok have never understood. They fight with their hearts, not just their minds. The cantina seemed quieter now, as if the other patrons had been listening to the old commander's story. The 3 young soldiers looked at each other, uncertain what to say. Sir, Silka said finally, what happened to Captain Morrison and Lieutenant Rodriguez? Zektar's mandibles clicked one more time. That's another story, he said. And if you really want to hear it, you'll need stronger drinks. The bartender brought another round of drinks to the table. The 3 young Vorthok soldiers had switched to something stronger, just as Zektar had suggested. The old commander watched them carefully, noting how they tried to hide their nervousness. You said there were more stories, Termac said, his voice slightly shaky. About the humans in the war, Zektar nodded slowly. Many more, each one worse than the last. He picked up his new drink, a thick blue liquid that smelled like burning metal. The second story I'll tell you happened 6 months after Kepler 442b. By then, word had spread through the Vorthok military about what humans could do. But our high command didn't believe it. They thought we had simply been unlucky. What happened next, sir? Silka asked. We were assigned to secure the Tau Ceti supply corridor, Zektar said. It was a string of space stations and supply depots that stretched across 3 star systems. Very important for our war effort. My superiors told me it would be easy duty. Just guard some supply runs and keep the shipping lanes clear. The old commander's eyes grew distant again. For the first month, everything was quiet. Too quiet. Ships would leave Station Alpha on schedule, but they never arrived at Station Beta, or they would reach Beta, but their cargo would be missing. Sometimes the ships would arrive completely empty, with no sign of what happened to the crew. Pirates? Kivran suggested. That's what we thought at first, Zektar replied. But there were no distress signals, no signs of battle damage on the ships. The crews just disappeared, the cargo vanished. It was like ghosts were stealing from us. Zektar took a long drink before continuing. Then we started finding bodies. Vorthak soldiers killed with surgical precision. No wasted shots, no unnecessary damage. Each death was clean, efficient, professional. It was terrifying. Who was doing it? Silka asked. A human special operations unit, Zektar said. They called themselves Ghost Company. 20 soldiers, led by a major named Steve Collins, and a sergeant named Lisa Park. 20 humans against an entire sector's worth of Vorthak forces. The three young soldiers looked at each other in disbelief. 20 humans did all that damage? Termax asked. 20 humans brought our entire supply operation to a halt, Zektar confirmed. Major Collins was a master tactician. He understood our supply routes better than we did. He knew exactly where to strike to cause maximum damage. Sergeant Park was his right hand, an expert in stealth and sabotage. Zektar's mandibles clicked as he remembered. They would strike without warning, take what they needed, and vanish before we could respond. We never knew where they were, where they would hit next. It was like fighting shadows. The worst part was how they seemed to know everything about our operations, he continued. They knew which ships carried the most valuable cargo. They knew when guard shifts would change. They knew about secret routes that weren't supposed to exist. How is that possible? Kivrin asked. They were smarter than us, Zektar said simply. They studied our patterns, learned our habits. While we were following standard military procedures, they were thinking 3 steps ahead. Every time we changed our tactics, they adapted faster. The old commander paused to drink again. The attack on Mining Station Delta 7 was when I truly understood what humans were capable of. It was our most heavily defended position in the sector. 300 Vorthak soldiers, advanced security systems, automated defenses. It should have been impossible to attack. But they did attack it? Silka asked. They didn't attack it. Zektar said they infiltrated it. Major Collins and 12 of his soldiers somehow got inside the station without triggering a single alarm. By the time we realized what was happening, it was too late. Zektar's voice grew quieter. I was stationed there that night. I was making my rounds when the lights went out. Emergency power kicked in, but the red lighting made everything look like a nightmare. Then the screaming started. The 3 young soldiers leaned forward, hanging on every word. The humans moved through the station like death itself. Zektar continued. They knew exactly where to go, exactly who to target. They took out our communications first, then our weapon storage, then our command center, all without making a sound until it was too late. I saw Sergeant Park with my own eyes, he said. She was like a ghost, moving through the shadows. She killed 6 Vorthak soldiers in less than 30 seconds, using nothing but a knife and her bare hands. She moved so fast, so quietly, that the others didn't even know she was there until they were dying. Zektar's hands shook slightly as he picked up his glass. Major Collins was even more frightening. He didn't just kill soldiers, he turned our own defenses against us. He reprogrammed our security systems to attack us instead of protecting us. He used our own weapons, our own technology to destroy us. What happened to you? Termax asked. I was lucky, Zektar said. I was knocked unconscious early in the fight. When I woke up, it was over. 300 Vorthak soldiers dead. The entire station's supplies destroyed or stolen. And the humans had vanished without a trace. How many humans died? Silka asked. 2, Zektar said quietly. Just 2. 300 Vorthak warriors killed by 20 humans, and they only lost 2 of their own. The cantina seemed to grow even quieter. The 3 young soldiers stared at their drinks, trying to process what they had heard. But that's impossible. Kivrin said finally, No species can be that effective in combat. That's what I thought too, Zektar replied. But I learned something that night. Humans don't fight like other species. They don't rely on superior numbers or better weapons. They rely on something much more dangerous. What's that? Termax asked. Intelligence, Zektar said. Not just smart tactics or good planning. They have the ability to think like their enemies, to predict what we'll do before we do it. They turn our strengths into weaknesses, our advantages into disadvantages. Major Collins and Sergeant Park continued to haunt our supply lines for another 4 months, he continued. Every time we thought we had them trapped, they would slip away. Every time we changed our procedures, they found new ways to defeat us. They cost us more supplies and equipment than an entire enemy fleet. How did it end? Silka asked. They were reassigned, Zektar said. Called back to Earth for a new mission. On their last night in our sector, they sent us a message. It was Major Collins speaking directly to our command center. What did he say? Termax asked. Zektar's mandibles clicked rapidly. He said, "Thank you for the training exercise." It was educational. Then he and his ghost company disappeared forever. We never saw them again, but we never forgot them either. The old commander finished his drink and set the glass down hard. That was my second lesson about humans. They don't just fight with courage and determination. They fight with their minds. They think, they plan, they adapt. And they're very, very good at it. The three young soldiers sat in stunned silence, trying to understand what they had heard. Finally, Silka spoke up. Sir, how many more stories do you have? Zektar looked at her with tired eyes. Too many, he said. Each one worse than the last. Each one teaching me something new about what humans are capable of when they decide to fight. Will you tell us another? Kivran asked. Zektar nodded slowly. Yes, but first, you need to understand something. The stories I've told you so far were about human skill and intelligence. The next story is about something much more frightening. What's that? Termex asked. Human rage, Zektar said quietly. What happens when you make them truly angry? The cantina had grown busier as the evening wore on, but the corner table where Zektar sat with the three young soldiers remained quiet. The old commander stared at his empty glass, lost in memories that clearly brought him pain. Sir, Silka said gently, you mentioned human rage. What did you mean? Zektar looked up at her, his dark eyes filled with something that might have been fear. Have you ever seen a Vorthek warrior go into battle fury? He asked. Of course, Termax replied. It's part of our training. When a Vorthak gets angry enough, we become stronger, faster, more dangerous. Human rage is different, Zektar said quietly. Much different and much more terrifying. He signaled for another drink, then began his third story. This happened during the siege of New Carthage. It was a human colony world, mostly civilians trying to build a new life. Families with children, old people, farmers and shop owners. Not soldiers. Why were you attacking civilians? Kivran asked. Orders, Zektar said simply. The High Command wanted to force the humans to surrender by targeting their non-military worlds. They thought if we threatened innocent people, the human government would give up. The old commander's mandibles clicked with what sounded like regret. We were wrong about that too. The humans don't abandon their civilians. They protect them, even when it costs them everything. What happened at New Carthage? Silka asked. We blockaded the planet, Zektar explained. Cut off all supply lines, all communication. Then we began landing troops to take control of the major cities. The civilian population was supposed to be evacuated, but there weren't enough ships. Hundreds of thousands of people were trapped. Zektar paused as his new drink arrived. The humans had a small military presence on the planet. Maybe 2,000 Marines led by a captain named Tony Martinez. His job was to protect the civilian evacuation routes while the transport ships loaded people and took them to safety. 2,000 Marines against your entire invasion force? Termax asked. We had 50,000 troops, Zektar confirmed. The odds were heavily in our favor. Captain Martinez knew he couldn't win, but he had to buy time for the civilians to escape, so he chose to make his stand at Thunder Pass. What was Thunder Pass? Silka asked. A narrow mountain pass between the capital city and the spaceport, Zektar said. The only route large enough for the evacuation transports. If we controlled that pass, we could stop the evacuation and trap the civilians. The old commander took a long drink before continuing. Captain Martinez had 12 Marines with him at the pass, 12 soldiers against my entire division. Among Them was a corporal named Nancy White and a young private named Bobby Chun. They were all so young. Younger than you are now? The battle began at dawn, Zektar continued. We expected to overrun their position within hours, but the humans had prepared well. They had dug in, set up defensive positions, and turned the narrow pass into a killing ground. For the first 6 hours it was a normal battle, he said. We attacked, they defended, we lost soldiers, they lost soldiers. Both sides fought professionally by the rules of war. Zektar's voice grew quieter. Then something changed. One of our pilots made a mistake. He was supposed to attack the Marine positions, but his targeting system malfunctioned. Instead of hitting the soldiers, he hit a civilian transport ship that was landing at the spaceport. The 3 young soldiers leaned forward, sensing that something important was about to happen. The transport ship was carrying families, Zektar said. Women and children, old people, babies. It crashed and burned, and everyone aboard died. Captain Martinez could see the smoke from his position in the pass. What happened then? Kivran asked. Something changed in the captain's eyes, Zektar said. I was close enough to see his face through my scope. One moment he was a professional soldier, calm and controlled. The next moment he was something else entirely. Zektar's hands trembled slightly as he picked up his glass. The humans have a word for it, Berserker. It means a warrior who fights with such fury that he becomes something more than human, something almost supernatural. Captain Martinez started screaming, he continued. Not in fear or pain, but in rage, pure, terrifying rage. And then he did something I've never seen before or since. He stood up in the middle of a battle and charged directly at my position. That's suicide, Termax said. That's what I thought too, Zektar replied. But it wasn't suicide, it was something much more dangerous. Captain Martinez ran through weapons fire that should have killed him 10 times over. He moved like he was possessed, like death itself couldn't touch him. The other Marines followed. Him, Zektar said. Corporal White, Private Chun, all of them. They abandoned their defensive positions and charged directly into our lines. It was insane, but it worked. How is that possible? Silka asked. Fear, Zektar said simply. My soldiers were terrified. They had never seen anything like it. Humans. Running toward them, screaming with rage, ignoring wounds that should have dropped them. It was like fighting demons. The old commander's voice grew even quieter. Captain Martinez reached my position first. He had been shot 6 times, but he kept coming. He killed 8 of my soldiers with his bare hands before anyone could stop him. His eyes were wild like an animal's, but there was intelligence there too. Cold, calculating intelligence. The battle turned into chaos, Zektar continued. My soldiers were trained to fight other soldiers, not berserkers. We retreated, regrouped, and attacked again. But every time we pressed forward, the humans would charge us with that same insane fury. How long did it last? Termax asked. 18 hours, Zektar said. 18 hours of continuous fighting. The humans fought with broken weapons, with rocks, with pieces of metal. When they ran out of ammunition, they used their hands. When they were wounded, they kept fighting. When they should have been dead, they kept fighting. Captain Martinez was everywhere, he said. Every time we thought we had him cornered, he would appear somewhere else. He was covered in blood, both human and Vorthak, but he never stopped. Never slowed down, never showed any sign of pain or exhaustion. What happened to him? Silka asked. He fought until the end, Zektar said. By the time the sun rose on the second day, only 3 humans were still alive. Captain Martinez, Corporal White, and 1 other Marine. They were barely standing, but they were still fighting. Did you defeat them? Kivran asked. We didn't need to, Zektar replied. The evacuation was complete. 50,000 civilians had escaped during the night. The humans had accomplished their mission. Captain Martinez looked at me across the battlefield, Zektar continued. He was dying, we both knew it, but he smiled, actually smiled. Then, he and his 2 remaining Marines walked away, back toward the city. You let them go? Termax asked. My soldiers refused to follow them, Zektar said. They were too afraid. These men had just fought an entire division for 18 hours and survived. No one wanted to face them again. The old commander finished his drink and set the glass down. That was my third lesson about humans. They don't just fight with skill and intelligence. When you threaten what they care about, they become something beyond normal soldiers. They become living weapons, powered by rage and love and the absolute refusal to give up. What happened to Captain Martinez? Silka asked. He died 3 days later, Zektar said. His wounds were too severe. But he died knowing that he had saved 50,000 innocent people, and that knowledge was worth more to him than his own life. The 3 young soldiers sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they had heard. Sir, Kivrin said finally, how many more stories are there? 3 more, Zektar said. Each one teaching a different lesson about what humans are capable of. The next story is about their greatest weapon of all. What's that? Termax asked. Their minds, Zektar said. The human ability to think their way out of any situation, no matter how impossible it seems. The night was getting late, but the 3 young Vorthek soldiers showed no signs of wanting to leave. They sat at the table with Commander Zektar, completely absorbed in his stories about the Great Galactic War. The cantina around them had grown quieter as other patrons drifted away. You said the next story was about human minds? Silka said. About their ability to think, Zektar nodded slowly. The most dangerous human I ever faced wasn't a berserker warrior or a stealth expert. She was a fleet admiral named Karen Thompson, a strategist and tactician who could think circles around our best military minds. A female commander? Termax asked, surprised. Humans don't care about gender when it comes to warfare, Zektar explained. They promote based on ability, not tradition. Admiral Thompson was proof of that. She was brilliant, ruthless, and completely unpredictable. The old commander ordered another round of drinks before continuing. This happened during the Battle of the Titan Nebula. It was supposed to be our great victory, the battle that would break human resistance once and for all. What made it so important? Kivrin asked. The Titan Nebula was a massive cloud of gas and dust that blocked several important trade routes, Zektar said. Control of that area would give us access to the human core worlds. My superiors assembled the largest fleet in Vorthak history. 120 warships, including my own command vessel. That's an enormous fleet, Silka said. It was, Zektar agreed. We were confident of victory. The humans could only spare 30 ships to defend the nebula. The odds were 4-1 in our favor. What could possibly go wrong? His mandibles clicked with bitter amusement. Everything. Admiral Thompson made everything go wrong. How? Termax asked. She understood something we didn't, Zektar said. Numbers don't always matter in space combat. What matters is how you use your ships, where you position them when you attack. Admiral Thompson turned our superior numbers into a disadvantage. Zektar paused to drink, then continued. The Titan Nebula was full of electromagnetic interference. It made long-range sensors useless and disrupted communications. Most commanders would see this as a problem to overcome. Admiral Thompson saw it as a weapon to use. I don't understand, Kivrin said. She knew our tactics better than we did. Zektar explained. Vorthak fleet doctrine is based on overwhelming firepower and coordinated attacks. We rely on our ships working together as a single unit. But the nebula made coordination almost impossible. Admiral Thompson had help from her officers, he continued. Her tactical officer was a commander named Rick Davis, and her navigation specialist was Lieutenant Helen Brooks. Together they turned the nebula into a maze where our superior numbers meant nothing. What did they do? Silka asked. They split their 30 ships into small groups and hid them throughout the nebula, Zektar said. When we entered the area, we couldn't see them on our sensors. We were flying blind while they could track our movements using specialized equipment. The first attack came without warning, he continued. 6 human ships appeared out of nowhere, hit our rear guard, and vanished back into the gas clouds before we could respond. We lost 3 vessels and never even saw who killed them. Zektar's voice grew tense as he remembered. Admiral Thompson kept doing this. Small groups of human ships would appear, strike hard, and disappear. Each attack was perfectly timed, perfectly positioned. She was picking us apart piece by piece. Why didn't you just leave the nebula? Termax asked. We tried, Zektar said, but Admiral Thompson had predicted that too. She had positioned ships at every exit point. Every time we tried to retreat, we ran into ambush. She had turned the entire nebula into a trap. The worst part was how she used our own formations against us, he continued. Vortex ships are designed to fight in close formation, supporting each other, but in the nebula, we couldn't maintain formation. Our ships kept getting separated, isolated, picked off one by one. How long did the battle last? Silka asked. 12 hours, Zektar replied. 12 hours of being hunted like prey. Admiral Thompson was always one step ahead of us. Every time we tried a new tactic, she had already prepared a countermove. I remember one moment particularly clearly, he said. We thought we had finally cornered a group of human ships near the nebula's center. We moved in with 20 vessels, planning to destroy them with overwhelming firepower. What happened? Kivrin asked. It was another trap, Zektar said. The human ships we were chasing were just bait. Admiral Thompson had positioned the rest of her fleet around us. When we moved in for the kill, we found ourselves surrounded. But she only had 30 ships, Termax protested. You still outnumbered her. Not at that moment, Zektar said. She had concentrated her entire force against 20 of our ships. For those few minutes, she had us outnumbered. And she used those minutes to devastating effect. Admiral Thompson didn't just rely on surprise and positioning, he continued. She used everything. Asteroids became weapons when she used gravitational fields to hurl them at our ships. Gas pockets became bombs when she ignited them with laser fire. Even the nebula's electromagnetic fields became tools in her hands. How is that possible? Soka asked. Human creativity, Zektar said. They don't just follow standard tactics. They invent new ones as they go. Admiral Thompson fought that battle like she was composing music, each move flowing perfectly into the next. The turning point came when she used our own weapons against us, he said. One of our damaged ships was leaking plasma from its engines. Admiral Thompson sent a single fighter to ignite that plasma trail. The explosion destroyed 4 of our vessels and damaged 6 more. Commander Davis and Lieutenant Brooks were essential to her success, Zektar continued. Davis could calculate firing solutions faster than our computers. Brooks could navigate through the nebula like she had built it herself. Together, they made Admiral Thompson's impossible strategies work. By the end of the battle, my fleet was in ruins, he said. We had lost 96 ships. Admiral Thompson had lost only 8. She had turned a 4-to-1 disadvantage into a complete victory. What happened to you? Termax asked. My command ship was badly damaged but still functional, Zektar said. Admiral Thompson could have destroyed us easily. Instead, she sent us a message. What did she say? Silka asked. She offered us safe passage out of the nebula, Zektar said, but only if we agreed to carry a message back to our high command. What message? Kivrin asked. That the war was far from over, Zektar said. That humans would defend every world, every system, every inch of space with the same determination we had just witnessed. She wanted our leaders to know what they were really fighting against. Did you deliver the message? Termax asked. Yes, Zektar said quietly. But they didn't listen. They thought Admiral Thompson had just been lucky. They didn't understand that we had faced something much more dangerous than luck. What was that? Silka asked. Pure intelligence, Zektar said. Human strategic thinking at its finest. Admiral Thompson didn't beat us with superior ships or better weapons. She beat us with her mind. She outthought us, outplanned us, and outmaneuvered us at every turn. The battle reports from that day were studied for years afterward, he continued. Military academies throughout the galaxy still teach Admiral Thompson's tactics. She redefined what space combat could be. What happened to Admiral Thompson? Kivrin asked. She continued to command human fleets throughout the war, Zektar said. Every battle she fought was a masterpiece of strategy and tactics. She never lost a single engagement. How is that possible? Termax asked. Because she understood something that we Vorthek never learned, Zektar said. War isn't just about fighting. It's about thinking. The side that thinks better, plans better, adapts better, usually wins. The old commander finished his drink and looked at the three young soldiers. That was my fourth lesson about humans. They don't just fight with courage, rage, and skill. They fight with their intellect. They can take any situation, no matter how hopeless, and find a way to turn it to their advantage. Are there more stories? Soka asked. 2 more, Zektar said. The next one is about something even more dangerous than human intelligence. What could be more dangerous than that? Termax asked. Human will, Zektar said quietly. The absolute refusal to give up no matter what the cost. The cantina was nearly empty now. Most of the other patrons had left hours ago, leaving only a few die-hard drinkers scattered at distant tables. The bartender looked like he wanted to close, but he didn't dare interrupt Commander Zektar's storytelling. You mentioned human will, Kivrin said quietly. What did you mean by that? Zektar stared at his glass for a long moment before answering. After the Battle of the Titan Nebula, I was reassigned. The High Command decided I needed to learn more about human psychology. They sent me to work at Prison Complex 7. Prison? Silka asked. Not just any prison, Zektar said. It was where we kept high-value human prisoners. Military officers, scientists, political leaders. People who might have useful information about human defenses and strategies. Were you an interrogator? Termax asked. No, Zektar replied. I was a guard. My job was to watch the prisoners, make sure they didn't escape, and report on their behavior. The actual questioning was done by specialists. The old commander's mandibles clicked nervously. I thought it would be easy duty. How hard could it be to watch a few hundred humans locked in cells? I was very wrong about that too. What made it difficult? Silka asked. The humans refused to act like prisoners, Zektar said. They organized themselves, created their own command structure, and maintained military discipline even in captivity. It was like they were still soldiers, just temporarily inconvenienced. That doesn't sound so dangerous, Kivrin said. It was more dangerous than any battlefield, Zektar replied, because it showed us something we hadn't understood before. You can capture a human's body, but you cannot capture their spirit. Zektar ordered another drink before continuing. There were 2 prisoners who exemplified this perfectly. Colonel Peter Hayes, a former Marine commander, and Dr. Susan Miller, a civilian scientist who had been working on defensive technologies. What made them special? Termax asked. Colonel Hayes had been captured during the siege of Colony Prime, Zektar sighed. He had held a defensive position for 6 days against impossible odds before finally being overwhelmed. When they brought him to the prison, he was barely alive. Broken bones, internal injuries, severe burns. Any reasonable being would have been broken by what he had endured. But he wasn't broken? Sil_K asked. He was stronger than ever, Zektar said. Within a week of arriving at the prison, he had established himself as the leader of all human prisoners. He created duty rosters, organized exercise periods, and maintained discipline among his fellow captives. Dr. Miller was different, but equally impressive, he continued. She was a civilian, not a soldier, small, quiet, seemingly harmless. But she had a mind like a computer and a will like steel. What did she do? Kivrin asked. She turned the prison into a laboratory. Zektar sighed. Using nothing but scraps and supplies she could steal or trade for, she began building devices. Communication equipment, medical tools, even weapons, all hidden from the guards. How is that possible? Tor_Max asked. Human ingenuity, Zektar replied. Dr. Miller could take apart a food dispenser and turn the components into a radio transmitter. She could use cleaning chemicals to create explosives. She could turn a medical scanner into a weapon. The 2 of them working together were unstoppable, he continued. Colonel Hayes provided the military leadership and tactical planning. Dr. Miller provided the technical expertise and scientific knowledge. Together, they began planning something that should have been impossible. What was that? Silka asked. A mass escape, Zektar said. Not just for themselves, but for all 200 human prisoners in the complex. The three young soldiers leaned forward, fascinated despite themselves. The planning took months, Zektar said. They had to map the entire facility, identify guard rotations, find weaknesses in the security systems, all while pretending to be broken, defeated prisoners. How did they communicate without being detected? Kivran asked. Dr. Miller created a code using the prison's food distribution system, Zektar said. She could send messages by requesting certain food combinations. Hayes used the exercise periods to pass along tactical information through seemingly casual conversations. I watched them every day, he continued. I knew something was happening, but I couldn't figure out what. They were too clever, too careful. Every time I thought I was close to discovering their plan, they would change tactics. What happened during the escape attempt? Termax asked. It began during the night shift, Zektar said. Dr. Miller had created a device that could override the cell locks. At exactly midnight, every human prisoner's door opened simultaneously. But they were still trapped in the prison, Silka pointed out. That's what we thought, Zektar said. But Colonel Hayes had planned for that too. He divided the prisoners into teams, each with a specific mission. Some teams created diversions, others secured weapons, and still others worked to disable the security systems. Dr. Miller's group went straight for the main power core, he continued. She had figured out how to overload it, which would shut down all the prison's defenses. It was a brilliant plan, perfectly executed. Did they escape? Kivran asked. 47 of them did, Zektar said quietly. They fought their way through 3 levels of security, disabled dozens of automated defenses, and reached the shuttle bay. Colonel Hayes and Dr. Miller made sure the others escaped first. What happened to Hayes and Miller? Termax asked. They were recaptured, Zektar said. They could have escaped with the others, but they chose to stay behind and hold off the guards. They gave their freedom so that their fellow prisoners could live. That's incredible, Silka said. It gets worse, Zektar continued. When they were brought back to their cells, the interrogators tried everything to make them reveal where the escaped prisoners had gone. Torture, drugs, psychological pressure, nothing worked. They never talked? Kivran asked. Never, Zektar said. Not a single word about the escape routes, the rendezvous points, or the identities of those who had helped them. They protected their fellow humans even when it meant terrible suffering for themselves. How long did this go on? Termax asked. 6 months, Zektar said. 6 months of constant interrogation and torture. But Colonel Hayes and Dr. Miller never broke. They never gave up a single piece of information that could have helped us recapture the escaped prisoners. What happened to them in the end? Silka asked quietly. They died, Zektar said simply. Their bodies couldn't take any more abuse, but even in death, they were victorious. The 47 humans who escaped made it back to human space. They carried vital intelligence about Vorthak prison operations and security procedures. More importantly, he continued, their sacrifice became legendary among human forces. The story of Hayes and Miller spread throughout the human military. It became a symbol of what humans were capable of when faced with impossible odds. I don't understand, Kivran said. How is dying a victory? Because they achieved something more valuable than their own lives, Zektar explained. They saved their fellow prisoners and sent a message to all humans that no matter what we did to them, we could never break their spirit. The escape had consequences beyond the immediate rescue, he said. Prison security throughout the Vorthak Empire had to be completely redesigned. We could no longer trust that captured humans would behave like normal prisoners. More importantly, it affected our soldiers' morale, Zektar continued. If we couldn't break 2 prisoners with months of interrogation, how could we ever hope? To defeat an entire species with that same unbreakable will? I was there when Colonel Hayes died, he said quietly. His last words were not a plea for mercy or a cry of pain. He looked directly at me and said, "Tell your leaders that humans don't surrender." We never surrender. Dr. Miller died 2 days later, he continued. Her last act was to smile at her interrogator and say, "Thank you for proving that we're stronger than you thought." The 3 young soldiers sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they had heard. "That was my 5th lesson about humans," Zektar said. "Their will is unbreakable. You can capture them, torture them, kill them, but you cannot make them give up. They will endure any suffering to protect what they believe in." "Is there one more story?" Soka asked. "Yes," Zektar said. "The final story. The one that ended the war and taught me the most important lesson of all." "What lesson is that?" Termax asked. "That some enemies are too dangerous to fight," Zektar said quietly, "because defeating them would destroy everything that makes victory worthwhile." The cantina was almost silent now. Even the music had stopped playing. The bartender had given up any hope of closing and was quietly cleaning glasses while listening to Commander Zektar's final story. The 3 young soldiers sat motionless, hanging on every word. "The last story," Zektar said slowly, "is about the end of the war. About the day I learned why humans are the most dangerous species in the galaxy." He paused for a long moment, gathering his thoughts. "By the final year of the war, the Vorthic Empire had assembled the largest military force in our history. Over 10,000 warships, millions of soldiers, weapons that could destroy entire planets. We were ready for one final assault on the human homeworld." "Earth," Soka whispered. "Yes," Zektar confirmed. "Earth, the birthplace of humanity. Our leaders believed that if we could conquer Earth, the human spirit would finally be broken. All their colonies would surrender rather than see their homeworld destroyed." "Were you part of the invasion fleet?" Termax asked. "I was," Zektar said. "After my experiences at the prison, I had been promoted to fleet commander. My ship was part of the advance force meant to clear the way for the main invasion." "What did you find when you reached Earth?" Kivran asked. "Everything," Zektar said simply. "Every human ship in the galaxy was there. Military vessels, civilian transports, cargo haulers, even pleasure craft. All armed, all ready to fight. It was like the entire human species had decided to make their final stand at their homeworld." "How many ships did they have?" Soka asked. "Maybe 3,000, Zektar said. "We still outnumbered them more than 3 to 1. But I had learned enough about humans to know that numbers didn't tell the whole story. Who was commanding the human forces?" Termax asked. "General Patricia Stone was in charge of the planetary defenses," Zektar said. "Admiral Daniel Clark commanded the space fleet. Both were veterans of dozens of battles against us. Both were respected and feared throughout our military. The battle began at dawn, Earth time," he continued. "Our advance force moved in first, expecting to sweep aside the outer defenses. Instead, we ran into the most coordinated defense I had ever seen." "What made it different?" Kivran asked. "Everything was connected," Zektar said. "Every ship, every space station, every orbital platform worked together like parts of a single machine. Admiral Clark had turned the entire Earth system into one massive weapon. But the most shocking thing was who was crewing the ships," he continued. "These weren't just professional soldiers. There were civilians, old people, children barely old enough to serve. Entire families were fighting side by side." "Children?" Soka asked, horrified. "Human children mature faster than ours," Zektar explained. "But yes, some of them were very young. I saw a defense platform manned by a girl who couldn't have been more than 16 human years old. She fought like a veteran." "Why would they put children in combat?" Termax asked. "Because they had no choice," Zektar said. "This was their final battle. If they lost, humanity would be enslaved or destroyed. So every human who could hold a weapon joined the fight. The space battle lasted for hours," he continued. We destroyed many human ships, but they made us pay for every victory. Commander. Roy Jackson led a squadron of fighters that crippled 2 of our battleships before being shot down. Lieutenant Commander Beth Adams commanded a defense station that held off our entire advance wing. But the real surprise came when we reached Earth's inner system, Zektar said. General Stone activated something we had never seen before. Something that changed everything. What was it? Kivrin asked. They turned their own sun into a weapon, Zektar said quietly. Using technology I still don't understand, they created a massive electromagnetic pulse that spread throughout the entire solar system. The 3 young soldiers stared at him in disbelief. That's impossible, Termax said. I saw it happen, Zektar replied. One moment our ships were advancing toward Earth. The next moment every electronic system in our fleet was dead. Engines stopped working, weapons powered down. Life support systems failed. But that would have affected the human ships too, Soka pointed out. It did, Zektar confirmed. The pulse crippled their fleet as well. But here's the difference. They were prepared for it. They had backup systems, manual controls, emergency procedures. We didn't. The humans were willing to cripple their own defenses if it meant stopping us, he continued. They sacrificed their technological advantage to level the playing field. It was the most desperate tactic I had ever seen. What happened next? KIV_Ren asked. Chaos, Zektar said. Thousands of ships, both human and Vorthak, drifting dead in space. But the humans adapted faster. They got their backup systems online first, restored partial power to their weapons, and began picking off our disabled vessels. The battle turned into something primitive and brutal, he continued. Ships fighting at close range with whatever. Weapons still worked. Boarding parties using hand weapons and explosives. It was like warfare from 1,000 years ago. Did you win? Termax asked. We lost, Zektar said simply. Not because we were outfought, but because we finally understood what we were really fighting against. I don't understand, Silka said. During the battle, I received a transmission from General Stone, Zektar explained. She was broadcasting on all frequencies, speaking directly to our fleet commanders. What did she say? Kivran asked. She told us the truth, Zektar said. That humans would never surrender. That they would fight until every last one of them was dead. That if we wanted to conquer Earth, we would have to kill every human on the planet. But that was just a bluff, wasn't it? Termax asked. No, Zektar said quietly. It wasn't. She meant every word. The humans were prepared to fight to the death, all of them, rather than submit to our rule. Then she said something that changed everything, he continued. She asked us what kind of victory that would be. What would be the point of conquering a dead world? What would we gain by destroying an entire species? I was monitoring our command frequencies during this transmission, Zektar said. I could hear our own commanders talking to each other. For the first time, they were asking the same questions. What questions? Silka asked. Why were we fighting this war? Zektar said, what did we hope to gain? We had started the war to expand our empire, to gain resources and territory. But what resources would be left after we killed every human? What kind of empire would we have built on genocide? The turning point came when Admiral Clark sent a final message to our fleet, he continued. He said that humans were willing to die for their freedom, but were we willing to become monsters to take it from them? That question broke something. In our leadership, Zektar said. Our commanders realized that winning this war would cost us our souls. We would become the very thing we claimed to be fighting against, a species that destroyed others for its own benefit. So you retreated? Kivran asked. We withdrew, Zektar corrected. But not in defeat, in understanding. We had learned that some victories are too expensive to achieve. Some enemies are too dangerous to destroy. The war ended 3 days later, he said. Not with a peace treaty or terms of surrender, but with a simple acknowledgement that humans and Vorthaks could coexist without destroying each other. What happened to you after the war? Termax asked. I retired, Zektar said. I had seen Enough fighting, enough death. I came here to Nexus Prime to run a small trading business and try to forget what I had learned about war. But you can't forget, can you? Soka asked gently. No, Zektar admitted. Every day I remember the humans I fought against. Their courage, their determination, their absolute refusal to give up. They taught me that there are things more important than victory. What things? Kivern asked. Honor, Zektar said. Dignity. The knowledge that you fought for something worth fighting for. The humans had all of those things. They were willing to die for them. That made them stronger than any weapon we could build. The old commander finished his drink and looked at the three young soldiers. That was my final lesson about humans. They don't fight to win. They fight because some things are worth fighting for, even if you lose. That kind of enemy can never be truly defeated, because their strength comes from something you can't destroy with weapons. Do you regret fighting? Them? Soka asked. I regret the war, Zektar said. But I don't regret learning about humans. They taught me what real strength looks like. Not the strength to destroy your enemies, but the strength to know when fighting isn't worth the cost. What should we do if we ever face humans in battle? Termax asked. Zektar looked at him with tired eyes. Pray that you never have to find out, he said quietly. Because if you do, you'll learn the same lessons I did. And by then it might be too late to change anything? The three young soldiers sat in silence, processing everything they had heard. Finally, Soka spoke up. Thank you for telling us these stories, sir. We'll remember them. Good, Zektar said. Remember them and remember this. The strongest warriors aren't those who never lose. They're those who know what they're fighting. FOR. With that, the old commander stood up from the table and walked slowly out of the cantina, leaving the three young soldiers to contemplate the true cost of war and the meaning of victory.